Hey guys, what's up? It's Charlie here, and today we're going to be looking at 10 photos you won't find in history books. So at school, we're all taught history out of history textbooks. But textbooks don't include some of the most amazing things to ever happen in history. So here are some old vintage photos you'll never find in history books. But they're much more interesting than any photo you've seen today. Before we get into it, why not subscribe and press the notification bell too. Coming in at number 10 we have Reflections. There are many photos on this list which are strange, but they are all explained. This photo, however, remains unexplained. A few years back, a woman was digging through her great-grandmother's photographs. That was when she found one photograph of her grandmother from 1920. It was taken in an old graveyard, and in that graveyard was a pond. As you can see, the photo shows her grandmother as a young girl, but in the reflection shown in the pond appears to be two girls. One of them is clearly the reflection of her grandmother, but next to her grandmother appears to be another young girl. The only difference is her face is totally blacked out and you can't make out any facial features. There are some possible explanations for this image. One is that there was simply a development error. Back when old photos used to be developed in dark rooms, if you moved the image, sometimes it would print twice. So it could be the developer nudged the image and the reflection was printed twice. But some are convinced this is proof of paranormal activity. Do you think this photo is very early proof of ghosts or simply a development error? Next up is Mad Soldier. So this is one of the scariest images to come out of World War II. We all know that many soldiers see terrible things and have terrible things happen to them. Obviously, soldiers get damaged by war physically a lot, but one thing that many people underestimate is the mental damage many soldiers face. Sometimes, seeing some of the worst things imaginable can send people absolutely insane. This is called being shell-shocked and happens to many soldiers. As you can see in this vintage image taken in World War II, this is what's happened to one young soldier. He's got a totally crazed look on his face and wild eyes. I'm not sure what this soldier's seen, but judging by his face, it was not pleasant. Next up is Indian tattoos. In 1859, when Olive Oatman was only 14 years old, her parents passed away. Olive was then sold into the Indian slave trade. For many years, she was a slave of the Mojave tribe, but years later as an adult, she returned to America. However, when she did, everyone realized she wasn't being treated as a slave whatsoever. The Indians actually made Olive their equals, as shown by this tattoo. Olive was given the Indian tribe's tattoos that they give to one another. This shows they actually welcomed Olive into their tribe despite her being American. She must have been incredibly out of place, coming from America and then entering an Indian tribe. And it's also very impressive, she was taken from American life and was able to return back as an adult despite being in a tribe. Next up is Bayonet Man. Today, the US Marine Corps has some of the most high-tech and sci-fi-like weaponry available, but back in the 1940s, they would do battle with bayonets. If you take a look at this man surrounded by US Marine Corps holding bayonets, you may assume he is totally screwed. It looks like he's an enemy and he's messed with the wrong crowd of people. But this is actually Colonel Anthony Joshua Drexel Biddle. Not only did this guy have an amazing name, he's also a combat expert. Colonel Biddle was a hand-to-hand combat expert for the US Marine Corps in the 1940s. This photo was taken one day in 1943. He ordered all of his trainee Marines to try and kill him with their bayonets. But despite them starting off like this, he managed to disarm them all using his hands. Every year, the US Army spends hundreds of billions of dollars on high-tech weaponry, but Colonel Biddle shows that sometimes the old ways are the best ways. Next up is bare back care. Do you ever get a bad back? I'm sure many people have back pains, and nowadays you can solve them pretty easily. You can simply go to a chiropractor or get a massage. Well, back in the 1940s in Romania, people also did that. Except they weren't massaged by a person, but a bear. As you can see in this photo taken in Romania in 1940, a woman is getting a back massage from a bear. This was an old way of healing back pains in Romania. A bear handler would simply get their bear to sit on your back. The weight of the bear would then push your bones into the correct position. You may not think this would have worked, but according to everyone who tried it out, it really did. And by the look of this woman's face, she seems more relaxed already. I think having a bear sit on my back would make me feel anything but relaxed. But in 1940s Romania, this was the norm. Next up is Santas. Do you ever wonder where mall and street Santas learn how to become so Christmassy? Well, believe it or not, there are various things called Santa Claus schools. As you can see in this archive image taken in 1961, this is a typical day at a Santa Claus school. These men in their large white wigs and fake beards are preparing to be Santa Claus. In the 1960s, Santa Claus was just becoming a large commercial figure. In various parts of America, you would see men dressed up as Santa Claus on the roadside and in shopping centers. Of course, this is very common today, but back in the early 60s, it wasn't as common. But I guess you could say these men are the pioneers of St. Nick. Next up is smallest shop. Today, London is one of the richest cities in the world. There are many fancy hotels, restaurants, and boutique shops. But back in the 1900s, things were slightly different. Looking at the top of this photograph, it looks like a regular old corner store. But if you inspect the bottom half of this image, you'll see a totally different shop. This was actually the smallest shop in the history of the world. It was only 1.2 meters square in area. And it was a shoe shop located in London in the 20th century. This photo was taken in 1900 and shows the shopkeeper and various other locals inspecting his tiny store. This man not only sold shoes but also cleaned shoes on the roadside. Today, 1.2 square meters in London costs around £600. And by 1900 standards, that's around £20,000 today. So chances are this man wouldn't be able to afford his tiny shop if it existed nowadays. Next up is Monkey Boy. Here's another very strange archival image people are yet to explain. One day a man was digging through a large photo archive when he came across this. It appears to be a young boy's body sitting on the step of a door, but for some reason this boy has the head of a monkey. It appears this is just a mask. But many people say that back then they didn't have masks this realistic. The mask is very good and would have been very expensive back then. The image was likely taken sometime in the 20th century in the UK, but people still aren't sure exactly what the story behind this monkey boy really is. I like to think he's the world's first human-monkey hybrid, but who knows. Next up is mermaids. Nowadays, if you saw a picture of a mermaid, you'd assume it was photoshopped. But back in the 1920s, Photoshop did not exist. So how do you explain this image of dozens of mermaids waving at a camera? Don't worry, this isn't some kind of paranormal image. There's a very simple explanation to this image, and that is it's on the set of a movie. That's right, these are the mermaids on the set of the 1924 film Peter Pan. Back in the early 1920s, barely any special effects existed in films. And when this movie came out, many believed they actually used real mermaids. Whether mermaids really exist is still up for debate, but there's none to be seen here, even though this is one very interesting image. Next up is Swedish roads. So here's a photo of something pretty regular, but it's very funny once you know the backstory. In 1967 in Sweden, they introduced a new law to drive on the right instead of the left. In most of the world, you drive on the right, so Sweden was trying to transition to what many others do. But this image was taken the very morning that law came into practice. As you can see, it was absolute chaos out on the streets, as half of the people obeyed the new law and the other half didn't. Some people weren't even made aware of the new law, and some simply refused to follow it. Not only that, back then many people were very used to walking on the roads. So a mix of cars going both ways and people walking on the roads led to this very chaotic looking image. Check out the poll in the top right corner for the most interesting image on this list. And if you guys want more amazing videos, then check out my second channel. There'll be some amazing life hacks on there, and there'll be a link to that on screen in a moment. But as always, thanks for watching. Check out some more videos on screen right now. Leave a like if you enjoyed, and if you haven't already, what are you waiting for? Subscribe to Top 10s.